still people joining, so I'll just get them in.
I'm having all sorts of nightmares with my laptop today in terms of Wi-Fi and also audio. Hence why I look like Britney Spears with the old head mask on. So apologies if I go a bit dodgy after a while.
It's all right. I've just had a message to say that my internet's going to be disrupted at some point today. So fingers crossed it's not in the next hour. All right, I think we might start there. I think we've had a bunch more people come in, but that'll do. Right. Hello, everyone. So this Zoom from us this week is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to be talking so much about development like we normally do. And this morning, we just wanted to have a chat with Mike Davis, who's from the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Futures project, who are building an application on Nexus. So welcome, Mike.
Good to be here.
So where do we start? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your organization? Who is BEF?
Yep, so we are a UK-based social enterprise based in London area. And so it names Biodiversity and Ecosystem Futures, short for BEF. And what we basically do in summary is we build software and technology to help organizations around the world who are developing projects which tackle climate change and biodiversity loss. What we're building at the moment, or what we've already built, is a environmental registry. And what this is used is to record data and documents around projects and actually issue carbon credits or environmental assets. And then what also is in our roadmap is to develop a marketplace and green bond platform. I'm sure we'll go through kind of those in detail as well during this call as to what we're hoping those will be able to do.
Okay, so the BEF application then, you mentioned it's a registry at the moment, so somewhere where projects can upload information about what they're working on, and some way to record the carbon credits that they are generating. So why don't you tell us a little bit more how that carbon credit side of things work, because that'll tie into what we're
absolutely.
Where do carbon credits come from?
Yeah, so carbon credits is it's a very holistic word. We go for kind of the term environmental assets only because carbon credits are predominantly focused on one side of the market, which is the compliance market of the carbon markets. But there's another side, which is the voluntary market. Now, carbon credits are more focused purely on sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, basically absorbing it and tackling climate change that way. And that can be done through just planting a few trees in the ground. What we're kind of working with and the projects we're supporting and the kind of environmental assets that we're going to be dealing with are a little bit more complex than the conventional carbon credit, in that they have wider benefits above just capturing CO2. An example of the kind of projects we're looking at is REDD+. That stands for reducing deforestation through basically emissions and reducing forest degradation. And they're focused basically on projects which are, one, reforesting rainforests, for example, in the tropics, so the Amazon region, but at the same time working with local communities, so indigenous people, to ensure that they're sustainable projects. There's been a big issue with the entire market, and in that you probably see projects all the time which all around, we tackle climate change by planting some trees in the ground. But actually those projects aren't very good at, one, tackling climate change, actually absorbing CO2, and also they're not very sustainable because they're not actually engaging the communities involved. So they're not actually a very good metric or method to capture CO2. So the projects we're working on are kind of more broader and slightly more complex. Some of them are at a national level, others are significantly smaller than that. But they're focused on sequestering carbon, tackling biodiversity loss, and also working with local communities. So they kind of have a trifactor component of them rather than just capturing CO2. And as a result, they're actually worth more than conventional carbon credits on the market. And in terms of what a registry is, so right now you have to, if you're going to sell carbon credits or issue them, you have to have them recorded on a registry, because that basically gives public record as to one, you having an underlying project which created the carbon credits in the first place. And then it's basically a place to record ownership and transfer those assets to different parties. In terms of that, the question around what are carbon credits, they're basically one carbon credit equals 1 ton of CO2 removed from the atmosphere. So typically that's the main metric used. So it's created when a project does a series of things, such as planting trees or doing reforestation projects, or broader than that, it could be renewable energy projects. And as a result, they've had a third party verify that they've sequestered a certain amount of carbon from the atmosphere. And if they've sequestered 10,000 tons of CO2 from the atmosphere, they're then issued 10,000 assets which they can sell to fund future development and actually pay their team to continue with the project.
Okay, so how are those environmental assets then? Let's call them that. How are they valued? I mean, who assigns, or who assigns the value to the project to say, or does the project have to prove that they've produced a certain amount? How does that kind of work?
Yeah, so before a project even starts, they have to kind of meet a few criteria. One, it has to be additional, which means that the carbon removed has to have taken place because of the project. It wouldn't have happened regardless anyway. So without the carbon credits, that project wouldn't have happened, and therefore you wouldn't have sequestered the carbon. The other key feature of these projects is that they're permanent, in that it's not a 1 year kind of solution. It's going to have long lasting impact and actually storing carbon. And the final one's around leakage. So by doing this project, you're not going to cause, for example, deforestation in a different part of the local area. Now, in terms of how they're valued, there's a few factors which influence it. It's all market driven. So it's basically, it's a buyer's market, because there's quite a large supply of these, but there's a lot of low quality assets available, and the pricing depends on several factors. One, which is the project type. So is it a afforestation or reforestation project? Is it there are projects which are around implementing cooking stoves in Africa and so forth, and different project types have different valuations. And then the other kind of the key factor is the standard they've used, the methodology they've used to develop their project. Some methodologies are more stringent, are harder to do, and therefore, as a result, the project is deemed better quality, more accurate, more reliable, and therefore can charge a higher price. But it is very dependent on actually the project itself. You don't find that one carbon credit is the same price across the entire industry. It kind of is influenced by all those different factors which influence basically each project, and each asset will have a unique value. Even if you have two similar projects across the world, they'll probably have different valuations in terms of the actual credits themselves.
Yeah. And the reason I'm asking this, I guess it's setting the foundation for everyone who's watching as to how this will tie into the features that you can put, you can use blockchain for. So I think the important point to take away from that is that the carbon credits value for one project that is not equal to the same for another project, and therefore one carbon credit is not one carbon credit. These are not the same value as these, and therefore carbon credits would not be tradable interchangeably in the same way.
Yeah, and I think to build on that as well, you might, if you do research, you'll probably find that there are some startups looking to kind of apply cryptocurrency to carbon markets, in that you have a cryptocurrency backed by carbon credits. But then the whole issue is you don't have one, transparency of the projects you're supporting, and two, again, it's not a standardized unit, it's not a standardized kind of valuation, and therefore it doesn't really work. And that's why I think a lot of those are struggling to really gain traction.
Okay, so I guess the next thing I was going to ask to see a demo, but I suppose before we do that, what's your motivation for using blockchain then?
Yeah, so there's key issues with this market, in that it is extremely inefficient. It's heavily reliant on intermediaries, and actually tracking asset ownership and auditability is really poor. That's kind of three big issues. As a mechanism to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss, it's fantastic, but the underlying infrastructure needed and the methodologies aren't quite up to the level they need to be to really scale and actually have an impact. In terms of why we're using blockchain, it's kind of the perfect tool for the situation, in that registries right now, which are tracking who owns what, are quite inefficient, and also actually tracking kind of auditability around different transactions, because they're going through so many different brokers and third parties, it gets really blurred and difficult to kind of have that provenance of where that asset came from and the underlying project. The main reason we're using blockchain from the registry perspective, which is our first solution, is that it offers significant benefits in terms of efficiency, auditability, and security. We're not too concerned around the decentralization component, but those three alone make it significantly more attractive than conventional technologies used for registries. Hence why we're a private chain using hybrid as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, because somebody posted that question in our Slack yesterday, unrelated to this conversation, and that's basically the answer I gave, because the question was that for people using private chains and hybrid chains and things like that, there's obviously an element of centralization going on there, and you need to trust, the on-ramp and things to those applications. So why do it? Why use blockchain? And the answer is that it doesn't have to be entirely decentralized. Yes, it would be in an ideal world, but what you still get is transparency and auditability to the key stakeholders. You might not need the public to have access to all of the audit, the access to the ability to audit all of the data, or even visibility into all of the data, but the key stakeholders that you do need for your ecosystem, be that legal practitioners or whoever it might be, there might be governing bodies that need to audit it. You can permission them into your private chain and still provide them with a immutable ledger of the data and provide that transparency. So that's why it's done. I think that's the answer you've just given, basically. Okay. All right, so can we have a look at what you've built so far?
We can do, yeah.
And once I think we'll just, I guess we obviously want to see how it works, and then we'll kind of talk about how that fits into, or rather how Nexus fits into that, and how you're using the Nexus blockchain features as we go through.
Yeah. All right, let me share my screen. Oh no, I need to be host to share my
I'm gonna attempt to let you do that. Hang on a sec. Can you share yet? Okay, hold on. Yeah, I'm gonna make you host, because if I do it to all participants, then things tend to go a bit awry. Just gonna make you host a sec. There you go.
Super. So I should be sharing my screen now. Hopefully my Wi-Fi is good enough, so we don't just it's not super slow. But can you see my screen? Oh, hello. I'm getting silence. Super. So what we've got here is kind of the. Oh, I will. What I'll do is I'll give a run through, and then we'll unmute Paul so you can go back to being the host of this. So what you've got here is the home screen, or kind of the dashboard view of when you've logged in. Now, in terms of how we're using the Nexus blockchain, when you're logging in, you're logging into a SIG chain. I think that's one of the reasons that we found really. 1 second. Let me unmute Paul. Participants.
Thank you. Sorry, I accidentally muted myself.
No worries. I thought I just disappeared, so that's fine. So starting off on kind of why we've used Nexus in the first place. I mean, there's tons of different reasons, and we'll probably go into those a little bit later. But one of the big ones was sig chains, in that people can just log in from anywhere, and we don't have to manage the different keys, the private keys of the users. Now, obviously, we could manage it ourselves, but then there's a risk that if we get compromised, for example, then everyone's account could be vulnerable. So having that is huge for us. And when you're logging in, you are logging into your sig chain. Now, in terms of what you'll see, this is a view of a project developer. So this could be a government, this could be a local authority, a private organization, a charity, a community, anyone who wants to actually develop these kind of projects. And here you can see the 2 projects we've got so far. Now, these are kind of in their later maturity, in that they've had all their documents verified and so forth, and therefore they're now ready to issue their units, basically create their tokens. Now, just going through the dashboard as well, you can see these are the issuances. These are basically when you're requesting to create those tokens. You can see those are under review, so the admin has to check that the documentation you provided is all aligned to kind of what you're requesting, the stuff you've already completed, and then the stuff that's ready to be finished. In this, hopefully, we'll do a actual issuance that you can see that. In the My Assets page, this actually shows you all the assets that you have already. Now, in terms of assets, each project, when they do an issuance, will create fungible tokens, which then they can then transfer to other parties on our registry, or they can also retire. When we talk about retirement, we're talking about basically taking it out of circulation, destroying it, burning those tokens. And that's what happens when you offset your carbon footprint. And that if anyone ever purchases offsets, what's actually happening is you're paying for someone to destroy that carbon credit so it can't be used in the future. So that's the feature as well. Now, if we go to my projects, the process of kind of issuing your units is you basically submit the details around your project. So here I say I want to issue 30,000 units. I'm just going to use dummy data here. The monitoring period, so the period in which basically my project has been observed and my units can be awarded in, is uploaded here, and the vintage, it's the year in which those credits were created. So say the project started in 2008 and it finished in 2018, and we wanted to actually let's do 2020. So dummy data. Then in terms of our asset type, it's a verified emission reduction asset. You also have to provide details around who actually verified, so who was the organization that basically ticked off your awarding of those assets. So who verified that you've actually absorbed 30,000 tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. We're going to say this is a verified company. And then what we do is we then do a verification. So this at the moment isn't actually using the blockchain component, and that's because it needs to be verified by an admin of BEF basically to ensure that it's correct. Now I've done kind of those in the UK are Blue Peter. I've something I've prepared earlier. If we go to my issuances, we have basically the similar project. This one's under review, but this one's now ready. It's been approved by the admin. In this case, it was 25,000 units. So here I'm actually going to complete the issuance, and this is when it comes into the blockchain time. This is when we're actually creating the fungible tokens, which can then be transferred and so forth. So I'm just going to put in the credentials.
Fingers crossed moment.
Yeah. And there you go. We've now actually created assets which are now viewable. So I just need to refresh my page. Take 30 seconds, but refreshing is just a bit quicker. And there you have it. Oh, hang on. 1 second, it hasn't. It's still waiting for it to confirm. This is when it doesn't do it as quick as we thought it would. There you go. So there you have it. We've got a brand new asset now. New fungible tokens. We've got 25,000. we can now transfer to other parties. Now, 1 second. what a really cool feature, and full kudos to Paul for this. But if you want to transfer assets to another party, you don't actually have to capture their token address. You basically bypass that. And how it works is we actually identify whether you're an individual or an organization on our network. And then from that, we can then capture all the people who have the token addresses that can receive that asset. And the way that you create those asset token addresses is just by submitting a asset request. Now, what we do is we then find all the different parties that have the addresses which can receive that particular token. In this situation, we've got one organization that's created the relevant account and therefore can receive this token for this example project, it's called. Now we're going to transfer them 20,000 units, and we can add a note as to, for example, as let's put Nexus.
So just to tie this back to the Nexus blockchain, just to clarify for people, obviously the when you're talking about the assets, we're talking about it's actually a Nexus token. So what you're transferring is tokens. What you just talked about there with the recipients is the ability to scan the blockchain for anyone who has a token account for this particular token type. And then you can look up who that is, so you can choose from a list who to send them to. Yeah, that's perfect.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. And I think the key thing for us throughout all of this was making it as intuitive as possible. That it's not going to work if you're getting Brazilian government officials to use this registry, but they have no experience in terms of kind of managing asset IDs, copying and pasting wallet addresses and so forth to and fro. It just makes it too difficult. So by doing this, it makes it so much more intuitive. And I think that the test of good design is they shouldn't even know they're using blockchain, because it should be so simple and so intuitive. So to support this transfer, we are going to then just provide our credentials. And we've now done a successful transfer. So we transferred that to the other account. Now we can then see that it's now been updated, our balance. And if we go to our transaction history, we can see we've got a new outbound transfer. So if we click on my transfer history, we can now see the transfer we just completed. And again, this is just pulling data from the blockchain. If we want to look into more details, then we just click here. And yeah, we can see more information around that underlying transfer. Now, if we wanted to do something, this is blocking the way. We wanted to actually retire, so we wanted to offset a carbon footprint, for example.
So this would be an organization wanting to purchase those carbon credits, those environmental assets to offset their own carbon footprint, right?
Yeah. So this would be a company wanting to offset their carbon footprint, and therefore would have bought the assets with the aim to then retire them. So if we're going to do it in demo project, for example, it's very similar to transferring the assets, kind of similar process. In this example, we're going to say they're retiring on behalf of Nexus, because Nexus wants to offset their carbon footprint. Can't spell. I really can't spell. And then going to provide again verification. Now they're going to retire the assets. Super. So if we refresh, so now we can see that we actually had our balance go down because they've been retired. And we can see now we've got 2,512 that have been retired. So if we then go to the public registry, so this is what everyone can see, that retirement will be seen in our public registry. So anyone can see that as well. So here, I want to find it. So this is the one that retired, and we can see the actual date. And people can actually view the details on that retirement as well. So we can see all the details, the notes and so forth. This is actually the transaction ID. And we can actually see the underlying project associated with that asset and that retirement. So here, let's move out of the way. You can see, again, this is the issuance we just did. So we can see the total number that were created, the fungible tokens in the first place, how many of those total tokens have been basically burnt, been retired. And then we can see all the different information. Again, we can see the issuance we just done and the retirement.
So you're actually using a currently unreleased feature there, which is the ability to burn tokens. That's something we added to our tokens API specifically for this project. And the way that works, because at the moment there's no ability to delete tokens or anything like that. So what we do for a burn is create a debit from the token, or whoever's actually got it, but it's the token address. It's the token account, and send those tokens back to the token address. But we add a contract to that transaction, to that debit transaction, and the conditions of that contract basically can never be met. It's a contract that does a if 1 = 0 or something like that. I can't remember exactly how we implemented it at the moment, but we basically did it with logic that can never equate to true, a condition that can never equate to true. Therefore, meaning that those tokens can never be credited, and therefore always sit in the pending balance of the token, thereby proving they're burnt. So it's kind of similar how you would do a burn with a UTXO blockchain, insofar that you send them to an address that nobody's got a private key for. Similar kind of concept. We're basically sending them to an address that everybody does know. We're sending it back to the actual token address, but with a contract condition that means that they can never actually be credited. So it just takes them out of circulation permanently, hence burn. Okay, so where did we get to?
I think there's only one other feature worth running through, which is blockchain related, which is just your standard account aspect. So when you the first time you log into an account with us, you have to set a recovery phrase, which I'm sure you'll all know from the actual Nexus wallet. And likewise, you can update the password PIN and recovery phrase using the kind of APIs provided by the team as well. So yeah, think of it, when you're logging into your own sig chain on our network, and then we've got kind of key features around actually creating the assets, the fungible tokens, transferring them, burning them, and then having kind of that other layer on top, which is the data and documentation to support those assets based on the underlying projects behind them. I think that's everything to run through. Anyone have any questions? Or
they're all muted at this point, but I've got the chat open if anyone wants to post a particular question on it. But whilst I'm waiting for those to come in, I guess that leads quite nicely into your roadmap and what's coming next, because I think that you've shown how you're using blockchain for transparency of the project issuance and the token burning or the token retirement. But I think when people currently think of blockchain, a lot of people think, in terms of payment, and there's a big payment aspect of this that is missing at the moment. And that's that, the organizations who want to purchase these carbon credits will pay in fiat currency currently. And that transaction is currently handled outside of this application. And then once payment's done, the project then comes in and manually does the retirement of the tokens. I'm leading into what's next on your roadmap. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the kind of first phase of the registry, which is now live. What we're building now, and we're actually built lots of it already, is the marketplace. This is a place where project developers can sell their assets directly to other parties on the registry or platform without the need for an intermediary. Right now, project developers are heavily reliant on intermediaries, brokers particularly, and also retailers to do that. And obviously that has some negative impacts in that. One, it charges high commission. And the second one is it makes it less transparent as to who's owning what. So having a marketplace where you can actually feel like an Amazon, you can list your assets, and then even by doing an auction or a fixed price kind of listing, you can sell those to anyone in the world, and it'll be fully integrated with the registry, so ownership will automatically be updated. And nothing like this has been developed before. And that's one of the reasons why we built the registry in the first place, is that it provides the key foundational layer to build all these other complex solutions on top. So the marketplace and the green bond platform would not be possible without having this foundational registry, which is built using blockchain. It just wouldn't be possible. And having that marketplace means that we're going to probably have a stable token to support the transactions. And then kind of our main focus right now to make this reality is just figuring out the kind of fiat bridge to be able to purchase that stable token to facilitate those transactions. And that's what Colin might have mentioned around looking for exchange partners to support that. But yeah, the marketplace is there just to really make it significantly easier, cheaper, and more efficient to actually transact these assets.
So in terms of tying that back to the Nexus blockchain, the two things you mentioned there, first being how we support the marketplace, and that will be our DEX. So this will be a decentralized exchange that you can build on top of, where owners of owners of the environmental assets, the Nexus tokens that represent these carbon credits, they will be able to list them on that exchange, set their price, and have that entirely tracked on chain. So that would be the first part. And the second part you mentioned there is the need for a stable token within the Nexus environment, which we know is needed because the organizations who are wanting to be buying and selling carbon credits, they want to be abstracted away from cryptocurrency as much as they can. They're not going to want, as you said earlier on, the use of blockchain should be largely masked, abstracted from those using it. So yes, as you mentioned there, we are looking at solutions for that already, looking for exchange partners to help us with a solution that will allow people with fiat currency to deposit and then have that automatically turned into a token within the Nexus environment, and then from there you can transact using it. So those are the two pieces that are coming. That was for the marketplace anyway. And you briefly mentioned the bonds there, the green bonds. I know you talked a little bit about this prior to jumping on the Zoom, but if you just want to give a little bit more information about that and what that's going to enable.
So I think the key thing is to develop these projects is expensive. You're looking at 50 grand plus to develop these projects, and those kind of, not even talk about the big ones. And right now, most of the project developers are private organizations or they're governments. And if you're not either one of those, you typically rely on a lot of government grants or funding to be able to do them. And as a result, the kind of stakeholders that are doing most of the work and that are actually the most important for the longevity of the projects and for them to be sustainable, which is the kind of local communities involved because they have a vested interest, aren't getting a fair share of the rewards. So what we're trying to build is a kind of a system to democratize access to financing, whereby anyone on this chat could actually directly invest in green bonds to finance those projects, meaning that those communities can actually directly crowdsource funding to be able to do the projects themselves. And as a result, it means that it completely changes the dynamic of the market, because you're no longer buying these assets as an investment, which some organizations do, but you're actually kind of buying a small share, or you're buying a small bond of that project, which actually will have value. Because as kind of with bonds, it'll be a zero coupon bond. So you won't get any interest, but upon the maturity of that bond, so when the project actually issues its units, its assets, you will automatically get your share of those assets, which you can then sell at a return on investment. But what it means is, by owning those bonds from a very early stage, as they get closer to maturity, as it gets closer to that project being able to issue its assets, they'll have more value as well, because by then you'll have more details around like the data and the documentation supporting that project, which again will be all on the registry, publicly available. You'll be able to actually track its progress, and you'll have a good idea of how many assets will actually be issued at the end. So it'd be really interesting to see the dynamic, because you could see that they're really cheap at the beginning, but as they get close to the assets, you can tell that this project's going to produce more assets than they thought it originally was going to, which means that the valuation is going to keep going up. It's going to be quite an interesting one. And it's a mechanism that's never been done before. And again, it can't physically be done without blockchain technology and having that registry to automate all of it. Because right now, if you didn't have that, you would have to rely on the project developer who's basically done all these bonds to then distribute them fairly. Whereas we can do that all by a smart contract without having to rely on that trusted party to actually do that.
Yeah, we were just talking briefly about the architecture of that before this call, but it fits in very nicely with what Nexus already offers in terms of revenue sharing, whereby you can represent the project essentially is represented by an asset, a Nexus asset on Nexus chain, and then the bonds themselves become tokens. You basically tokenize that asset with Nexus tokens, and those are the bonds, which means that the owners of those tokens are part owners of the asset, which is the actual project itself. And then the feature of the Nexus chain that you can utilize is that when you send any token, be that Nexus coins or any other Nexus token, if you send those to the asset, they automatically get distributed to all of the token holders. So they would automatically have rights to claim their share of the not revenue in this case. It would be the actual carbon credit tokens themselves. So upon issuance of the carbon credit tokens, those tokens would be sent to the bond issuance asset, which would then mean that they automatically get distributed to the bond owners. And that's all existing technology on chain. It's just we just need to tie it into, as you say, tie it into the registry and the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, our main blocker right now is the fiat payment. Once we've got that fixed, we can build everything. We've got all the stuff we need already. It's just having that. And once we've got that, we can literally get everything up and running in a fairly quick amount of time. It's just getting that key component fixed.
Yep, we're working on it. Yeah, and making good progress on that. Yeah, we don't talk too much about it right now, but yeah, you're not the only
yeah, I can imagine
that requires stable tokens on Nexus, and therefore it's certainly high priority on our list. Okay, so I guess the next question would be, let's just talk a little bit about the architecture. I think you've already mentioned that it's a private chain. Well, it's currently a private chain. So, well, yeah, I think I'll just explain it because there's not much to explain. Currently, it's a private blockchain.
Yeah.
That will turn into a hybrid blockchain sometime in the future. We're actually just finishing off the work to support hybrid chains, which will come in the next Nexus release, the first of the Trillium++ releases. Now, it's a shame that Colin's not on the call today, because he would be able to provide a bit more background of this. But my understanding of the way that hybrid chains work is that the signature chain for the that contains or is used to generate the Genesis block for the private chain exists on the main chain, and then you basically use that mainnet signature chain to control the permissioned access or control access to your private chain.
Yeah.
So that's how you allow other organizations or stakeholders to have access to your data to your chain, is that access control is done through the mainnet signature chain. And then whether or not there's any further data that's sent from the private chain, like taking a block hash and sending that into the mainnet so that you can take advantage of the mainnet security. I'm not sure how often that's being done or whether it's being done. I'm not sure what the plan is yet and how those parameters are being set up. So perhaps we could we'll follow up with how the hybrid chain side of it works once we get a few more details from Colin on that.
That sounds good.
But it is a private chain or for now, and it will be a hybrid chain. Okay, so one of the main questions that's been posted by our community to be asked today is why did you choose Nexus, and how how did you examine other blockchains, and how did you come to the conclusion to use Nexus?
No, it's a fair comment. So my background before BEF was as a management consultant, doing stuff on blockchain and operating models, of which had interactions with several different projects who built on several different platforms. None of them would be able to go beyond a kind of proof of concept. We're interested in building something which is actually scalable, and not just going to be a pilot or a fancy use of blockchain, one that can actually be used now and actually deliver real value and be able to grow with extra maturity. And in terms of the tech side, we didn't think any other blockchain came close to what Nexus provides. I think the main thing for us was, one, it being able to scale, two, how easy is it to build on, and three, kind of the intuitive design and also the team. I think from a scalability perspective, I think there's no question. Obviously, some people might say that it's less battle tested than other blockchains, but from a technology perspective, it's exciting. That's why we kind of were willing to take that kind of jump. From an intuitive perspective, it was so easy to build. Having a full set of APIs, which basically provide all the features and functionality you could possibly need, was so good for us because it meant our devs were able to develop stuff so quickly without having to custom build their own smart contracts and functionality themselves. So that was a massive plus for us. And then the kind of one reason why people might think why and why not was because there weren't many use cases, and we saw the tech of sig change and so forth, and how important that would be from a user experience perspective. Being one of the first projects to actually build on Nexus would be a kind of a big plus for us, because it means we get that extra kind of interaction with the likes of Colin, Paul, and the team, which we wouldn't be able to get at other blockchains. And that's kind of why, if we're going to take the risk with kind of a leading edge blockchain in terms of its technology, but it might be less known, by being one of the first, it means you're going to get that kind of devotion, that interaction with the core members, so that you're going to always figure out how it's going to work. I think that was a key thing for us, and being able to work directly with Paul and Colin and figure out all sorts of different ways to approach, and Paul developing different APIs to meet our needs, for example, the burning. I think that was key for us, and as a result, we've been able to get something out there 5 times quicker than if we went anywhere else. And so that we actually feel comfortable now that if we had some of the large organizations we're talking to use it straight away, we'd be fully comfortable in that it's not going to basically break, it's going to be fully scalable, and that we can build on top of it now. So that's kind of, my 2 cents as to why we chose Nexus.
What I was hoping you'd say. I mean, and that's exactly what we've been aiming for all along. We want to make it straightforward for application developers to use. That's why we've developed the API the way we have. We're trying to make it so that application developers don't need to know the inner workings of blockchain. Obviously, you need an appreciation of it and need to know why you're using it, but beyond that, it needs to be straightforward. And you made a point there about smart contracts, you know, where when we will be allowing or providing developers to, you know, get into the nitty-gritty of smart contracts if they need to, but that's much later. The whole point of the way we've approached smart contracts is that you're abstracting application developers from it. You provide them with preset conditions, contract conditions that can be applied just through, you know, an API parameter, so that you can do things like burn a token by just calling a very simple API method without having to know how to write the smart contract behind it that actually makes it unclaimable and makes it burnt, you know, a burnt token. It's that kind of thing. That's exactly the approach we've been trying to take. So good.
And I think from a scaling perspective, I think this game's all around, you've got to build something quick and you've got to test it and you've got to refine it. And having those APIs makes it so much easier than if you had to devote a few weeks to develop a call or a bit of functionality, which it turns out is just not going to work. We've been able to just basically completely change our design architecture in a matter of days because of this kind of these API approaches, which again, from a time perspective, it wouldn't be possible using others.
That's good. That's good. Well, I'm glad the experience has been.
Your hard work is worth it, Paul.
Well, also likewise, you know, it's been super useful to have to work closely with somebody building, so that we can then fine tune our you know, APIs, the way we use private and hybrid chains, and which we have done. We've made quite a few changes to even existing API methods just to make them a bit more consumable, then you know, make them easier for you to use. I mean, that's exactly the kind of relationship we were trying to build with use cases at this stage, so that we can make sure that what we're putting out there is generically applicable, but also just makes things, it makes life easier for you as a third-party application developer. All right, I'm just going to have a look down my list of questions that are that I've got from the community. I think we've covered pretty much everything. There was
any questions on the actual market themselves or understanding of that side?
Yeah, so there was a question here. I'm just going to read it because the Kyoto Protocol appears to be the primary international regulation standardizing the various procedures associated with creating, trading, and tracking environmental commodities. How does BEF envision itself fitting within the framework of the Kyoto Protocol? Specifically, what relationships need to be forged with various national and international government bodies in order to achieve your desired role as an accepted registry and marketplace? Now, I sent this to you earlier, so I know.
So there's kind of two answers. I'll give both of them. The first one is, it doesn't really matter. So the Kyoto Protocol basically ended in 2012, so it's no longer used.
Right.
But the kind of mechanism behind it, which was the Clean Development Mechanism, CDM, which is a type of project, more regulated, that's still going, but it's kind of dying. And that's why COP26, which is in Glasgow next year, is so important, because we're going to have clarity, hopefully, as to what this future mechanism will be like. So when we talk about Kyoto Protocol, it's all around kind of governments and not governments, countries and key industries getting set basically caps at which they could emit. And then there was a compliance market, which was basically using CDM offsets to basically do a cap and trade system. It wasn't hugely successful, and there was lots of issues, and there's some concerns that aviation companies are going to use legacy CDM assets to basically offset the carbon footprint, even though there's a lot of evidence to show that they actually aren't effective and they haven't been able to actually absorb CO2. So actually they're pretty much worthless. But it goes on to an interesting point around what we need to do. So I think a key thing to take away is this, as I said, I think early at the beginning, there's two kind of components of the carbon markets. There's a compliance market, which is the cap and trade, which is CDM. And then there's a voluntary market, which when you're looking at offsets, the vast majority of companies are in the voluntary space because you're not mandated to participate in it. So that's where companies, financial companies or others will voluntarily purchase offsets to reduce their carbon footprint. On the compliance side, you're looking at industries such as oil refineries, aviation, and so forth, who are mandated to offset a number of their carbon footprint. So in the voluntary market, the benefit is because it's not mandated, it's actually got less regulation, which is a good thing from an innovation perspective, as it's kind of the testing ground for kind of all the innovative products that go and eventually are looking to transition into the compliance markets. Where we're starting off is the voluntary markets, because the compliance markets are heavily run by governments. So the UNFCCC is the registry used, and that was developed by the UN. So there's not much scope to kind of break into that. But the voluntary market, there is a lot more. There's a lot more room to kind of introduce innovative solutions and so forth. Now, the difference between the two, just so people have greater awareness, is that the voluntary markets are basically regulated by private organizations or kind of charities as well, in that you won't have a in the compliance market, you have a mechanism called CDM, so clean development mechanism. In the voluntary market, you have private organizations who provide standards, so different methodologies to do projects. Now, different standards have different values, but there's two main ones really. There's one called Vera, and there's another one called Gold Standard. And if you're going to buy an offset, those are the two that most people will come across. What we're building is a registry to not necessarily support them, but support projects within the voluntary market space. And the reason why we can't work directly with Vera or Gold Standard is that they have their own registry, which they mandate users, mandate projects using their standard have to use. So it's kind of, they kind of have an oligopoly control, duopoly control of the market. But there's a lot of innovative solutions and different standards coming up, which are actually quite promising and, in my view, slightly better. And we're talking to them, but there's also the opportunity to actually work directly with countries as well. So our focus right now is very much trying to get people to adopt our registry. And we're talking with large organizations who are so big that they can choose whoever they use for registries, and they might want to have their own registry because they're that big. And then we'll also talk to standards who are interested in potentially using different registries. And then there's also components from countries who might want their own registry to record voluntary and compliance assets as well. So that's kind of our scope of where we're targeting at the beginning. But the key thing is, if we can crack the voluntary market, these issues still apply to the compliance market. They have the exact same issues. If we can crack this in the voluntary market, we can apply it so easily in the compliance market as well. And I think building on top of the hybrid system, our goal is, if we can prove this as well, we can go to the other registries and help them implement blockchain as well. And they can use our chain to kind of build out the network, and then we can use hybrid to manage nodes and so forth. So we can really scale it beyond just us running and kind of running the nodes, to actually having it a blockchain and a network used across the industry to kind of really transform this industry.
Okay, I think that pretty much answered everything. I had a few follow-up questions, but you've kind of answered them already. Okay, so if people want to have a quick look at your site, I believe it's the BEF.org.
BEF.org, yep. If you haven't already, follow us on Twitter at BEF Limited, capital BEF, capital L Limited, and also follow us on LinkedIn as well, if you haven't already. It'd be great to see some of your faces and so forth.
Are you in our community Slack at the moment? I know you're in our team Slack, obviously.
I don't know if I am. I can join though if it'll help questions and so forth.
I'll send you an invite to that afterwards. I think it would be useful. If anyone has any follow-up questions on this, they could put them to you directly. But in the meantime, feel free to either post them to me or just post them in our general channel or in our Telegram group, and I'll forward them on to Mike. Other than that, I think I don't have any more questions from anyone, so I'm pretty happy to wrap up there. Unless you had anything else you wanted to say, Mike.
No, just appreciate the time to be able to chat to everyone, and yeah, any questions, send them away.
Okay. Well, as usual, it's great chatting with you. Thanks for taking the time to stay up late tonight. I know it is
That's
getting
right.
there in the UK. Yeah, the project's looking amazing. It's and I know it's only the first phase at the moment. I'm really looking forward to what we're going to accomplish together in the future.
Absolutely, likewise.
All right, thanks very much, Mike. I think you're still host, so you're going to have to end this meeting. I just wanted to let you know.
That's right. I can do that. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
All right. Cheers, guys. See you later.